There are some things that you dare not say. Paul said those things with his chest, dared people to go and fact check. Hey guys, welcome back to Femora's House, where we talk loud about the defense of the faith. We make arguments in defense of Christianity, break down things logically, read about stuff, and faithfully present them to you. We've been running a series called One Standard, Two Prophets, and the first time around, I made a stillman of the argument. I try to present the Muslim position in the best way that I could, because if you don't do that, it kind of means that you're trying to straw man. Everyone is going to accuse you that, oh, this is not what we mean, this is a lazy argument. And so I presented the case the way the case was meant to be presented. It had 4 criteria: that Paul came late, that Paul never met Jesus, that Paul had nothing to stand on. I think I forget the fourth one now. If I remember, I'm going to put it on the screen. But there are 4 core arguments against him. And I laid everything down. And I made it really strong, too. And I even accused Christians, of trying to skirt these things, because these are strong arguments when you think about the fact that it was 3 years apart and he went to Arabia and Damascus before verifying the revelation that he got. Whereas the 12, the people who lived with Jesus, were still alive, that could have led to some corruption. And that's why a lot of people claim that Paul, corrupted the Bible. And I agreed to some extent. But then I told you that that's just your argument. I'm going to break it down, all the 4 arguments, and show you why they are no argument at all, as a matter of fact. So today I want to start with the first one, which is the lateness charge. Paul came late, no doubt. But does the fact that he came late mean that he corrupted? And if we were to test with the other prophet, which is Muhammad, because the idea is one standard, 2 prophets, right? So if we were to test with the other prophet and he fails the test and you let him pass through the detector, because if you remember in the last time I made this analogy about a metal detector, they're still walking through both, right? If the alarm blares for Paul, that's okay, it's on me. But if the alarm blares for Muhammad and you want to shove it aside, then it means that the lateness argument doesn't stand. Can we agree? First of all, I'm going to tell you that I accept the standard that if a man is reporting on events that he did not witness himself, there's a problem with that, and it's only as good as the distance from those events. And we have already established that he was sort of 3 years away when he got his revelation. 2 questions. If you read my article, which I'm also going to link in the description below, if you meet such a man, there are 2 questions you're going to ask. And the way I presented in the article is, you miss a wedding, and you have a FOMO, and, your friends are talking about the wedding, this happened, that happened. The first thing you're going to ask is, were you there? If they say no, the next question you're going to ask is, then who told you? So those 2 things are what is required to give you credibility. And I'm now going to show you that I'm going to ask Paul both. And I'm also going to ask Muhammad both. And we'll see who really can answer properly. There are 4 arguments I'm going to make today. The first one is a mathematical argument. I'm going to just show you math, numbers, walk through stuff. The second one is the creed. I will explain that when I get there, right? The third one is I'm going to show a paper trail that is unmissable. I'll show it clearly. I'll read the verses, follow everything. And then the fourth one is the day, and this is the most important one, right? Like the day that Paul was able to dare. When someone is trying to corrupt stuff, there are some things that you dare not say. Paul said those things with his chest, dared people to go and fact check. If you're a Nigerian watching this, you will remember Peter Obi when he was running for president back then in 2023. One of the famous mantras that made a lot of people follow him was go and verify, because whatever he says, he knows that he could back up. And this is similar to the instance of Paul. That's what I want to do today. So let's start with the mathematics. The crucifixion is dated by a lot of scholars between the year 30 to 33 AD. I've already established that. Paul is credited for 13 of the 27 books in the New Testament, but there are 7 that we agreed upon, and those are the 7 that I chose to use for this. Those are the 7 I'm still going to be quoting. But First Corinthians is actually the key letter, right, that this is going to rely on, and it was written at about 55 AD. So I just want to be clear on all the numbers here. This is the mathematical argument, right? So this was 30 to 33 AD is the crucifixion. The first letter, which is First Corinthians, was written 55 AD. So this is about 25 years apart. If you watch football, right, currently the World Cup is going on, and we're seeing Messi's performance. Messi is 39 years old. He's doing some amazing stuff. I'm supporting Argentina, by the way, even though I'm not quite sure they're going to be able to win it. Maybe when this video comes out, maybe they've won, maybe they haven't won. I don't know. You can fight me in the comment section. But if you're watching his performance in this World Cup, right, it is roughly the distance between Messi's performance in this World Cup and when he made his debut back in 2006. He came on then as a substitute, he assisted a goal and he scored. The game was against Serbia and Montenegro before they split. I can remember that clearly. I'm not related to Messi. How much more, right? People who sat with Jesus, who ate with Jesus, and even Jesus's brother himself. You can imagine that, like, they would have a lot of memory of what Jesus actually said. So let's see if that distance actually makes sense, because we're talking about numbers here. When these letters were read aloud, the eyewitnesses were alive. The people who witnessed Jesus's events, I already told you, James, his brother, right, was alive. Peter at the rock was alive. John, one of the pillars of the church, was alive. The 12 were alive. The 500 that he mentioned, they were all alive. They were all in Judea. And Paul was writing about the teachings of a man that you could easily go and ask his brother. It kind of doesn't make sense to me that you tell me that that guy tried to corrupt the message. When you look at the mathematical timeline, it's just 25 years. Like, how many of you guys forget the things that happened 25 years ago? I am 34. I remember a lot of things that happened 25 years ago, and I was still a kid, let alone someone who is, 50 or 60, remembering things that happened 25 years ago. I literally just gave you the Messi analogy. It doesn't make sense. But that's not enough. Let's go to the second argument, which is the creed. Now, this is the most interesting part, because we can say 25 years, he may still mix a couple of things. Even James may have forgotten a couple of things. Peter may have forgotten a couple of things. They are old now. They've shared the message, even though they wrote their own books. Maybe they forgot a couple of things, because the primary claim is that the Bible is corrupt, right? But there was something called the creed that Paul quoted verbatim that existed even before Paul was converted. I'm going to quote it specifically for you. It was in 1 Corinthians 15, and Paul explicitly said, verbatim, he says, "For what I have received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas," that is Paul, "and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. And then he appeared to James, and then the apostles." The most important things I want you to hear there is that he mentioned received and passed on. Let us first establish something, that Paul is a very highly educated person. He studied under Gamaliel. One of these days, I'm going to tell you the story of Gamaliel, and I'm going to tell you why the fact that Paul studied under Gamaliel makes him an incredible educated person. But that received and passed on is a technical rabbinic vocabulary that anyone who is educated in rabbinic studies, who understands the law, who is a proper Jew or a Pharisee, will be able to recognize that he's not speaking about something that is just happening. He's quoting something verbatim. Now, this is the way that those scholars then can tell that it is a quote, because they are also quite smart, just like Paul is, right? The words that Paul used, the things that he said, Paul doesn't use them anywhere else in his letters. He mentioned the 12. He doesn't use them anywhere else in his letters. He typically will say apostles, by the way. He balanced rhythmic structure, the creed structure, rhythm. Like, I used to rap, so I understand like that kind of rhythm. But forget about my rap, right? If you were to get an email from a colleague, right, and in the email you find something similar to the way Shakespeare would write, you would immediately be able to tell that, like, this thing is quoting something else. This person couldn't have written this. That is the same thing that was happening here. So scholars, when they hear that, received, passed on, and the specific things he said, they know that Paul is not just talking about something new that he's just inventing. He's quoting something, and that something dates back to previous, even before he got his own revelation. But I'm not going to talk about it from the perspective of just Christians, right? I'm going to quote even skeptics, right? Even the people who are agnostics and atheists, who are Bible critics, and I'm going to tell you what they think about that particular creed. Gerd Lüdemann, I already mentioned him in the previous essay. You can read it in this new essay as well. He's an atheist professor. He dated it within the first 2 years after the crucifixion, not later than 3. Bart Ehrman, we already know Bart Ehrman, very famous skeptical scholar. Is probably the most famous skeptical scholar or skeptical scholar of religion alive. He mentioned that this is very ancient, likely predating Paul's conversion, and that's what we all believe, that the creed, it was before Paul's conversion. Richard Carrier, who doesn't even believe that Jesus existed at all, he concedes that it is almost certainly pre-Pauline, composed within a few years of Christ's death. That is just mind-blowing when you think about this, because the people that I'm talking about are not even Christians. And if you now look at mainstream studies, they fix this between 30 to 35 AD, which is the period of time that Christ existed. If you remember, 30 to 33 AD, nobody says this is past 40 AD. So if Paul is quoting a creed that was dated between 30 to 35 AD, marks 40 AD, are you still going to call that late? Because he might be late there, but he got the revelation that predates his own conversion, and he quoted that live. And then he did something else, which I'm going to get to. Stay with me. Stay with me. What I've said in terms of when he wrote 1 Corinthians is about 25 years. I'm giving you the Messi analogy. The creed that is quoted right now places him at just 5 years from Christ. But stay with me. I'm going somewhere. The third argument is the paper trail, right? So let's read a couple of passages. Galatians 1 verse 20. He says, I assure you before God that what I am writing to you is no lie. Nobody swears under oath, especially someone who is a Jew. I mean, he was a Jew. He was a proper Jew, which is the reason why he was persecuting Christians. So he understood Jewish law. Nobody swears under oath when they are lying or when they are trying to give you boring information, because that information is boring, right? That's the first one. Galatians chapter 1 verse 18 to 19. Verbatim. Then after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem to get acquainted with Cephas. Cephas is Paul. And stayed with him for 15 days. And I saw none of the other apostles, only James, the Lord's brother. That is the second part. So first, he swears. Second, he went 3 years later to meet with Peter to confirm. And then he met with James. Third verse. Let's read this. This is Galatians chapter 2 verse 1 to 2, but I'm going to condense it. Then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem. He went on and on. And then he says, and presented to them the gospel that I preach among the Gentiles, for fear that I was running or had run my race in vain. So he went, this is it. The first thing is he swore an oath. Then he went 3 years later to meet with Paul and James. Then he went 14 years later just to tell them the message he has been preaching to the Gentiles, so that all his work will not have been in vain. Let's go on. Galatians chapter 2 verse 9. It reads, James, Cephas, and John. These are the three pillars of the church. And exact quote, those esteemed as pillars gave me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship. And if you read on to verse 6, he says, they added nothing to my message. So this is the build-up. He first swore an oath that he had no reason to lie. But of course, he needed to confirm, because I had told you before that one of the accusations is that, he went to preach 3 years and then he could have corrupted. No, he went, he confirmed, he met James, he sat with them for 15 days. He ate with them, he talked with them, they preached to him, they strengthened his message, he went back and he continued preaching. But just so that it doesn't feel like what he has done is in vain, he came back 14 years later to meet the same people to confirm the message. Nothing was changed. And then he went on again to let us know that they didn't just not change anything. They gave him and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship, which means they brought him into their union. These are the three pillars of the church. These are not the people we are talking about that confused the Bible or corrupted the Bible. These are the pillars of the church. So if you look at that paper trail, I kind of don't think that you will still think that this same guy corrupted the Bible. I'm still going to Muhammad, right? But this is Paul. First Jerusalem visit was between 35 to 36 AD. Almost all the scholars agree that that is when Paul received the creed. And Peter and James are both named in the creed. He spent 15 days with Peter, I've already mentioned that. And when you look at the chain of events, if I were to put it in one sentence, it is in year 30, Peter and James were there, they got the creed. Paul quotes the creed, then he sits with them in year 35. Then he wrote in year 55 a letter that was written at a time when people were hostile to him, because if you remember that this guy was a Pharisee, he was very learned, he was persecuting the Christians, and so they loved him as a Jew. Now he has turned around, he's preaching the gospel, and he wrote a letter to the people of Corinthians telling them stuff that the people who will read this are most likely hostile to him. And he linked everything and he named everyone 2 decades straight. I'm not quite sure we still consider that as a lateness, but I know that somebody will go and quote Galatians chapter 1 verse 11 to 12. So let me first read this, right? The gospel I preached is not of human origin. I did not receive it from any man, nor was I taught it. Rather, I received it by revelation from Christ Jesus. I mentioned this in the previous Stillman because I know that this is strong. Does this contradict with the fact that he received it from Peter? No. The revelation gave him his commission, but he went back to the community to go and learn the tradition. So the commission came from the revelation. The tradition came from the community because he had to go back there. So there's no contradiction there. Even though he received the message by revelation, not by man, that is the message. That is the commission. The tradition that the message carried and how he should teach the message, what the message was about, the death, the resurrection, the crucifixion, the blood atonement, all of these things were taught to him by him sitting down with the pillars of the church. Zero contradiction. And he gave us a fact sheet that contains a lot of witnesses, calling names. In part 3, I'm going to give you a full treatment of all of that. Now, the fourth argument, which is the dare, and this is where he gets, I feel like if Paul were living in the first, in this current century, like, he's going to be a menace. Governments are going to hate him. Even Christians are going to hate him because the guy is really bold. He's really, really bold. You were a Pharisee. You were a Jew. You were criticizing and persecuting Christians. And you dared them to go and verify in the place where you were hated the most. But let me just make it clear. This is what he did. He named Peter, James, the 12, 500 at once, most of whom are still living, quoted directly. When he says that, that is an invitation for you to go and check. Now, he was writing to the people of Corinthians. I live in Toronto. Corinth to Judea is in between the Mediterranean Sea. Like, pardon, I don't live in the old times, so please pardon that. The Mediterranean Sea, right? Normally, they wouldn't drive because there were no cars. They would take a boat ride. But if I were to compare it to modern times, right? That is roughly a drive between Toronto and Winnipeg. People do that all the time, right? I had a friend who, a couple of years ago, took a road trip from Nova Scotia all the way to Calgary. People do it all the time. And that is when you consider driving around the Mediterranean. But that's not what they used to do. They used to take a boat directly from Corinthians to Judea. Now, I'm not saying they are taking speedboats or the modern ships that are fast. No, it probably take them about 2 weeks. But the point I'm trying to make is that these people, they do business with the people of Judea all the time. The Corinthians and the Judeans do business all the time. So when he writes a letter to the church of Corinthians and he tells them these people are still living, he's inviting them to go and check. Now, that's not the problem. Going to check is not the problem. Going to check in a place where he's hated the most, because if Paul goes to Judea to face the Pharisees, they may likely kill him. That's why I said that he will be a menace in these times, because he's going to be the kind of activist who will come out and dare you to your face. Go and verify. That is Paul. If Paul were a liar, right? A liar would avoid stuff like this. You know, like a burglar would avoid daylight, you know. No, he doesn't do that. He presents it direct. That is Paul. Now, I'm not still saying that this proves the resurrection. No, we haven't gotten there. There are parts to this series, right? I'm not saying that he proves that he may not have corrupted the message. No, we haven't gotten there. What I am saying is that the fact that he was late is a meaningless, baseless argument. But this is one standard, two prophets. So let's walk Muhammad through the same detector and see where the alarm goes off the most. Muhammad's account of Jesus makes very strong and very specific claims about his life and the events that happened around 30 to 33 AD. I'm going to read a couple of these live, right? The same way I read the Bible live. Surah Al-Nisa 4:157. It says, "And for their saying, we killed the Messiah, Jesus, the son of Mary, the messenger of Allah. But they did not kill him, nor did they crucify him, but it was made to appear so. Indeed, those who differ over it are in doubt about it. They have no knowledge of it except the following assumption, and they did not kill him for certain." I'm going to talk about this part like another time, because first of all, this statement erases so much of history. It is incredible, but that is not today's argument. Today's argument is that Paul received his own revelations a couple of years after Christ has died, maybe 3 to 5. Muhammad began to receive his own revelation 600 to 610 years after Christ had died. I'm going to reinvite that football analogy again, right? That distance is roughly the distance between this World Cup and 8 times, if you multiply it 8 times, between the first World Cup, because the first World Cup was in 1966, it is 8 times. Nobody living can remember anything verbatim. Now, I know that there's the Isnad culture, but the Isnad culture only stops at Muhammad. It doesn't go further than that. So this is not 25 years. This is 600 years. Which alarm are you hearing right now? Is it 25 years or 600 years? Let's go on. Because I know that, I predicted like there are some thoughtful Muslims who would say, oh, the Quran is God's direct speech and it needs no witnesses. I've mentioned how the isnad works, vetted chains, blah, blah, blah. We take the isnad seriously, but everything about the isnad stops at Muhammad. A companion with Muhammad who was in the 7th century Arabia reaches him and he stops. And even the compilations of the best compilation of these companions still comes 200 years later, which is about 846. That is 2 centuries from Muhammad and 8 centuries from Jesus Christ. From the point of Golgotha, which is, Christ and all that. The isnad is not a weak instrument. It's not an instrument. We can just throw that in the bin right now. Because there is no machinery that exists to prove that what Muhammad is saying is true. Anything that proves anything, it stops at Muhammad. And the only thing you can do is special pleading. So if you can give me an argument without special pleading, I'll take it. The entire essay, right, banks on one thing. The objection against Paul is historical. This particular one, this lateness objection, is historical. It's too far. He could have corrupted it between the period before he went to see Peter and James. But then when we begin to ask about Muhammad, we switch it to theological. Distance doesn't matter anymore. It is God's direct revelation. Don't forget that Paul also got God's direct revelation, but we throw that into the bin. Those two cannot be your standards at the same time. You cannot say historical for one, theological for the other, especially when both of them claimed theology. So if distance doesn't matter, let's just shut up about distance, right? That is the end of distance. Boom, boom, boom. Alarm sounding for Muhammad, and I hear 0 for Paul. Like I said, I'm not trying to, prove what isn't. This is what I've done today. I've retired the lateness argument. I would like to hear your rebuttals in the comments. Please post your rebuttals in the comments. And if you want to see more of this, also hit the subscribe button, follow, share, turn on notifications so you're going to get the next one, because I'm going to be writing another article. The article for this one is posted in the description. The first one will be posted in the description as well. But here's where I'm going, right? I have not proven to you that this proves the resurrection, that this proves that Paul did not corrupt the message, even though I believe that very squarely. We're getting there. What I've just showed you is that the lateness objection is trash, and if we were to introduce the lateness objection, the only person that it affects is Muhammad. In fact, it affects him so much that the metal detector that we talked about in essay 1 and video 1 is jumping right now. So that is 1 alarm down. We have 3 to go. The next charge is this, right? He never met Jesus. He only had a private vision. Let me just give you a tease into that, right? He never met Jesus. That is Paul. I'm pretty sure you think Muhammad met Jesus somehow, right? He only got his message via a private revelation. Are you seeing where I'm going with that? The deeper question is this, right? What kind of experience is allowed to found a faith? Because if you say that meeting the person is your standard and you are claiming that Paul didn't meet Jesus, I'm going to ask you, what is the real experience that is important to found a faith? Is it the cave or is it the road? Which one are we comfortable to admit, right? I'm going to bring the same detector next time. And I'm asking you guys to come back with your popcorn. Let's walk them both through it. We're going to test. Both never met Jesus, right? But whose argument makes sense the most? Who is the alarm going to blare for? This has been Femora's House. Click the subscribe button. Follow the page. Share so that other people can see it. Turn on notifications. I'm going to be publishing the next essay. Next time I'm going to see you. Come with your popcorn. Thank you very much. See you next time.